year from Sri Lanka, where she makes her home, and more directly from Papua New Guinea, where she pursues her work as an anthropologist. Ms. Dissanayake has taught and written extensively on art from an ethological perspective, that is, from a biological and evolutionary perspective. And it's my great pleasure to introduce her to you.
The word art is like the words love and happiness in that everyone knows what they mean and recognizes what they refer to, but when pressed finds them difficult to pin down or to define with consistency or generality. But still we persist in using these words as generalities. Most often, the word art refers to a group or a class of things that can be viewed, looked at, things that have been painted or sculpted. But not just anything painted or sculpted or viewable. We go on to assume that there is some kind of qualitative difference or essence that pervades certain objects and activities. A vague, general, universal, transhistorical, almost sacred quality that makes these art. More specifically and less confusingly, we may talk about not art, but the arts, which include not only visual objects, but music, poetry, drama, and the like. When we ask what is art for, then, do we mean the arts, or do we mean capital A art in this general, tacitly reverent, metaphysical sense? The arts we understand to be cultural phenomena. That is, we expect their manifestations will vary from culture to culture, and we expect that certain individual arts and attitudes toward the arts will be found in some societies and not in others. Our discussion tonight will probably emphasize the arts in modern Western society, that is, as cultural phenomena. But underlying this viewpoint, most of us will also probably be holding some basic capital A art presuppositions. In my view, capital A art is very much an artifact or a reflection of the culture-bound, parochial kind of thinking of our own modern Western society. Still, I believe we can usefully address the question, what is art for, and we can talk about art in general. My view, however, does not see this generality as a sacred metaphysical essence. I would like to claim that although the arts are a cultural phenomenon, art can be profitably viewed as a prior biological one. What is gained by substituting biology for metaphysics? Simply, it makes better sense of the facts. First, unlike the fathers of modern aesthetic theory, we are aware today of the enormous time scale during which humankind evolved, some 4 million years. As psychologists, we would consider our comprehension very limited indeed if we attempted to understand the behavior of a mature person with reference only to the day on which we first met him, without looking into his infancy, his childhood, the past experiences that have made him what he has become. Yet this is what we do when we ignore the 3 to 4 million years before any of the individual arts can be discerned in the archaeological record. Presumably these arts, and I will name some of them, paintings in caves, musical instruments made of bone, engraved antlers, footprints in a pattern suggesting dancing, statuettes, modeled figures in clay, ornaments of various types. These are from the Upper Paleolithic, say 25 to 15,000 years ago. Presumably these arts did not arise full-blown without precedent. Another reason for invoking a wider perspective is the parochial geocentrism that we, like all human groups, seem to have about the importance and centrality of our own society and its ideas and values. We smile to discover that world maps in Madagascar show that island to be in the center of the world. Yet our modern Western notion of capital A art, when placed in a framework that includes humans and their ideas throughout history, all of those millions of years back, and across the globe, is similarly misplaced and naively insular. This does not mean that the problems which attend Western art at the present time are not of importance or of interest, but some of these problems today are due to our ignorance or prejudice concerning the implications of the undeniable fact that humans have had a long evolutionary history, a history 400 times longer than what is generally considered to be human history. Human history, we say, is with the beginning of writing, some 10,000 years ago. But mankind was evolving for 4 million years. That's 400 times longer than the longest human history we know about. This minuscule view limits our understanding of art and what it is for. My frame is ecological, that is, concerned with the evolution and development of behavior in the human animal. I call art a general behavior and say it is as characteristic of humankind as tool-making, symbolization, language, and the development of culture. The question addressed by our colloquium, what is art for, is a very good ecological question, meaning, why did the behavior of art arise at all? What does art, like language, tool-making, symbolization, contribute to the human species that would account for its universality in the human repertoire? In Darwinian terms, what is art for means, does art have selective value? And, if so, what is or was this selective value? 3 characteristics of art lead me to presume that art has had selective value. The first characteristic is that the arts are ubiquitous. Although no individual art is found in every society, or to the same degree in every society, there is found universally in every human group that exists today, or is known to have existed, the tendency to display one or usually more of what are called the arts: dancing, singing, carving, dramatizing, decorating, poeticizing speech, image-making. In evolutionary theory, it is a generally accepted postulate that if a characteristic such as an anatomical feature or a behavioral tendency is widely found in an animal population, there is an evolutionary reason for its persistence. It has contributed in some way to the evolutionary fitness of the members of the species. A second reason for asserting that art must have had selective value is that in most human societies, the arts are integral to life, to many activities of life, and not to be omitted. If a great deal of effort is expended in particular activities by individuals or groups, this also suggests that these are activities that have survival value in the Darwinian sense. Third, the arts are sources of pleasure. Nature does not generally leave advantageous behavior to chance. Instead, it makes many kinds of advantageous behavior pleasurable. But, granted art must have had survival value, what could this survival value be? An extraterrestrial observer watching us busily devoting time to decorating, embellishing, shaping our experience in songs, poems, unusual phraseology, would have to ask himself, what are they doing? What implying why? He could more easily understand other human activities, fighting, flirting, ordering, obeying, as these result in observable advantages to one or both parties. But what is the observable advantage to making or experiencing art? Evolutionary biologists and human ethologists have not turned their attention to this question, to the selective value of art. But ever since Darwin, occasional writers on psychology, philosophy, literature, history, and criticism have attempted to state why they think art is essential to human existence. And perhaps we can look there. In the seminar I am presently giving, we have been looking at these reasons proposed for art being not only valuable to or characteristic of, but necessary to human life. And what we have found is that, apart from their not being framed within a Darwinian theoretical perspective, but we can leave that aside, the answers usually given to the question, what is art for, seem implicitly to confuse the word or concept art with a number of other human behaviors and proclivities. For example, play, ritual, creativity, the human need and penchant for making order, for novelty, for symbolizing, for intensity of feeling, for self-transcendence. While these proclivities are often associated with the making and experiencing of the various arts, it is also true that they can be expressed and responded to in areas that need not be aesthetic at all. It is more parsimonious to attribute art's so-called selective value to characteristics art shares with these behaviors or proclivities, and not to anything specifically aesthetic. To give one example, thinkers from Aristotle to Nietzsche and Freud have stressed the therapeutic effects of art. It is cathartic or sublimative, substituting a make-believe world for an imperfect reality. Yet these are effects of play and some ritual practices, as well as of art, both of which, like art, are agreed to be therapeutic. Thus one could suggest that it is making believe, or formalizing and distancing characteristics of ritual and play, as well as of art, that is therapeutic. Moreover, much therapeutic art is not what we would think of as great or significant. As catharsis or sublimation, Harlequin romances will be as effective as Shakespeare. So therapeutic value is not demonstrably to be found in what is strictly aesthetic, whatever that is. In fact, whatever it is a problem. Our peculiar society, in many respects, is unprecedented and unlike any in which humans have ever lived, and certainly unlike the one in which our immediate ancestors lived for several million years, in a nomadic gathering-hunting existence in bands of about 25 persons, and within which art presumably evolved. And it is primarily our society which has given the word art an uncommon freight of meanings and significances. When we look at most non-Western or traditional societies, we find that many do not have a general word, art, though they do engage in making and enjoying one or more of the arts. So they have words for carving, decorating, being playful, singing, imitating. Even in our own society, as we look back to classical antiquity, to medieval times or the Renaissance, we find that their notions of what we have translated with the word art, ars or techne, is very different from what modern 20th century usage means by the term. Plato discussed beauty, poetry, and image making, not art. Aristotle, tragedy and poetry. By techne, which is the word that is generally translated art in our translations, by techne they meant the capacity to make or do something with a correct understanding of the principle involved, and had in mind not only the ancestors of what we call the arts, but prototypes of what we call philosophy, pure science, applied science, engineering, industrial technology. As in non-Western societies today, the arts were judged and appraised for their level of craftsmanship, their correctness of execution, and their appropriateness. Medieval European aesthetics was not separable from cosmology and theology. Much the same interconnectedness as is found in the complex worldview of the Australian Aborigines today. Renaissance aesthetic principles of imitating nature, demonstrating a moral purpose, and considering beauty to be an objective property of things are clearly different from our ideas about art today. Indeed, it has been only since about the 18th century, roughly 200 years, that the word art has become gradually limited to skills and products with an aesthetic function, that is, to please a disinterested, appreciative faculty. And it is only about 1 century since art for art's sake has been an articulated notion. Actually, 110 years. Walter Pater used the phrase in 1873. And it has been considerably less time than that our notion of the work of art as being not a picture or representation of something, but as a thing in itself, has gained general currency. You may remember when Winston Churchill's widow destroyed Graham Sutherland's portrait of her husband. She did not accept that the artist was not painting primarily a representation of Winston Churchill as much as he was painting a Graham Sutherland. More often than not, a work of art is appreciated now for what it is, not what it depicts or suggests or reveals. This emphasis is new in the history of art and in the history of human attention. Any attempt to impute evolutionary value or necessity to art in this framework is, I think, doomed to failure. And our modern notion of art, brought about by our own unprecedented and distinctive circumstances, reflects the oddness of our way of life and the peculiar position of the artist, the maker of works of art, who has since the Renaissance had an increasingly anomalous role to play. In most societies, either everyone practices the arts of value to that society, or specialists practice them in a defined context that is socially necessary and consensually valued. I will now describe briefly, very briefly, my position. I suggest that the biologically endowed behavior manifested today as art or the arts is the tendency to make things special. And I further elaborate this notion to say that making special implies recognizing and manifesting an order different from the everyday. When used to make important things or behaviors special, this proclivity has aided their perpetration and power. For example, the arts are often found associated with ritual ceremonies. From prehistoric times, ceremonies have served to bind members of a group together psychologically, to reinforce their common beliefs and values, to pass on history and tradition, particularly when there is no written language or when most members of the group are illiterate. These advantages make ritual ceremony a selectively valuable behavior. One can argue that the arts make ritual ceremony not only more pleasurable and thus more likely to be repeated, but also more effective and memorable. In neo-Darwinian terms, the arts, those things that have been made special, are enabling mechanisms, that is, evolutionary means to promote selectively valuable behaviors such as ceremonial and ritual. Humans universally tend to respond to specialness, or confer it on certain forms of experience, that is, to acknowledge and participate in an order different from the one in which the business of daily life is carried out, that is, making a living, procuring it, preparing food, resting, and so forth. In earlier times, and in non-advanced Western societies, this other realm or order is a sacred, socially shared reality, and artists are translators of or means to the apprehension of this reality. Only today is the other world a purely aesthetic realm into which each artist projects his individual private reality. Insofar as all of us are members of the same species, we will recognize resonances of ourselves in the privately motivated and individually presented works of others. But to an extent never before known in human society, and perhaps to an extent impossible for most to comprehend or come to terms with, the response to what the artist does today is dictated not by unified communal verities, but by chance, caprice, and the multitude of circumstances that distance us from each other and from the life we evolved over 4 million years to lead. Just as our society is unlike any other that has ever existed, and our hyper-literate, over-analytic, consumerist, materialistic habits of thought are unprecedented, the arts today are highly self-conscious, self-referential, and constrained by the commands of an inhuman marketplace. The tendency natural to all of us and insistent in the artist to make something special is solipsistically bizarre and misspent in a society where what is valued is not the sacred, timeless, and collective as heretofore, but the commercial, fashionable, and individual. There is no evolutionary precedent for this kind of demand on art or life, and I see it as a dilemma that will plague art and artists unless our society changes to be more responsive to the needs of humans as they were evolved over the long period before human history began.